والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning to all. First of all, as usual, I hope all of you are doing fine, keeping yourself safe and also sane at the same time. As we know, some areas are now starting to be affected by floods, especially in the southern part of Malaysia and also in the east coast. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep every one of you safe. And if you are affected in any way, please not hesitate to inform me or other lecturers or even the university or your respective kuliahs so that we can render any form of assistance possible, inshallah. And I'm sure efforts are still ongoing to assist those who are affected by the floods. And I know that some students are actively involved in such efforts. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to give you strength and also reward you for such efforts. Inshallah, as mentioned or agreed upon, um, I'm resuming with live lectures on Monday, and then we will meet on Wednesday morning to discuss what I have presented. So today, inshallah, I will be looking at another subtopic under the general or broad topic of interpretation and intellectual traditions, whereby we will look at the Quran from the Western perspective, or Western scholarship when it comes to the Quran, and also the study of the Quran or Quranic studies in academia, especially in the West. Yeah. So basically, today that is what we will look at, and this is actually quite significant because whether we like it or not, uh, these days, many things that come from the West are influential in the sense, and when it comes to ideologies, when it comes to certain thoughts, certain views on things, yeah, what has been exported by the West also in a way will influence those in the East, yeah, and it does have some impact upon Muslims, yeah, in general, and also when it comes to the study of certain elements or certain dimensions or certain aspects when it comes to Quranic studies or Islamic studies in general. Because whether we like it or not, we would have to provide a response perhaps towards what can be construed or assumed as misinformation or perhaps misunderstandings, yeah, of certain concepts, of certain ideas which the West might have when it comes to Islam in general, and when it comes also to Quranic studies in particular. So let me share the slides with you. We will go through the history, yeah, basically of the development of Quranic studies in the West. So we look at the interaction between scholars, yeah, which began even since the advent of Islam, yeah, since the 14th, 15th century, yeah. So we will look at that, inshallah. So let me share the slides with you. So as mentioned, we will look at Western scholarship and the Quran, and also the Quran in academia. As for the Western scholarship, in relation to the Quran, we can trace its origin. Yeah, we can trace the origins of Orientalism. So perhaps some of you might have come across this term, and this term actually has a very negative connotation, especially to Muslims and also those in the East. Yeah, so Orientalism, basically, we can trace its origin in part back to the medieval studies of Islam and also the Quran. And Orientalism generally refers to the study of Eastern cultures and traditions by Western scholars. So it is basically the study of Eastern cultures and traditions, which includes Eastern religions, yeah, uh, and as such Islam as well, yeah, by Western scholars. And it became very popular, yeah, during the colonial period of the 19th and early 20th centuries, because the West colonized many parts of the Eastern world, and they came into contact or they had to interact, yeah, with people of different cultures, of different religion. As such, they took it upon themselves, yeah, to study uh, these cultures, which includes religions as well. Yeah. So when we mention Orientalism, uh, it it could also refer to the fact that artists, yeah, in the West were inspired by the Orient. And as in the background of the slide, this is just an example of how certain Western artists depicted, yeah, the culture, and in this case, if I'm not mistaken, the practice of salat by people in the East, yeah, and this inspired also their artworks. And there were also Western scholars who specialized in the study of Oriental languages, religions, and also cultures. So during the colonial period, many Western scholars dedicated, themselves to the study of the Oriental languages, the language of the East, including the Arabic language, religions, including Islam, and also cultures of Muslim societies. So much of the early Western scholarship on the Quran developed from an Orientalist perspective, and this had a very significant impact on historical and contemporary understandings of the Quran in the West. So that is why, by tracing back, the roots or perhaps the origins of the Western scholarship on Islam and the Quran, etc., to Orientalism, then we can understand how it impacted, historical and also contemporary understanding of the Quran in the West. The Orient or the Occident, as Edward Said argued, basically this distinction between the Orient, and the East and also the Occident, which is the West, and also perhaps this idea that the Occident had superiority over the Orient, etc. According to him, it does not represent, a natural division. Rather, it is the result of an imaginative geography and must be examined as a product of cultural history. So here, Edward Said is arguing, that this distinction between the Orient and the Occident is something which is not natural, and in fact, it's a product of imaginative geography. Who actually determines, oh, this is the West and we are superior, and now we have the East who are basically inferior than us, blah 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 blah. Um, so there are certain prejudices and stereotypes which have traditionally accompanied this Orient-Occident distinction, have meant that the term Orientalism has come to have a pejorative meaning, referring to Western scholarship that ostensibly lacks objectivity and reflects a bias towards Western thought and culture. Yeah, because of this distinction between the Orient and between the East and also the Occident, the West. There is what Edward Said describes as, a lack of objectivity, and also a form of biasness when Western scholars actually examine or explore, the Orient, and as such, Muslims have not often held Orientalist scholarship in high regard, because the Muslims also viewed the West in with such skepticism, especially as a result of colonialism, and the effects that it had upon Muslim cultures and Muslim societies. It is understandable then that Muslims did not have, a favorable view or perspective of Orientalist scholarship. So that is about Orientalism. But before that, or prior to that, even, there was early Western scholarship on Islam, and also the Quran, perhaps, because whenever there is a study or exploration about Islam and Muslims, whether we like it or not, the Quran, which plays an important role in the lives of Muslims, and also which is a significant or the primary source of Islamic ethical legal teachings, doctrines, etc. The Quran, as such, is also considered to be an object or subject of study or scrutiny by scholars. From the 18th to the 15th century CE, in Muslim Spain, we can describe that largely Muslims and also Jews and Christians lived peacefully. They coexisted peacefully under Muslim rule, in Muslim Spain or in Andalusia. And despite this peaceful coexistence from the 8th to the 15th century, there were the Crusades, from the 11th to the 13th century, where military conflicts took place, and it was generally aimed at recapturing the Holy Land of Jerusalem from Muslim rule, because Jerusalem at that time was under Muslim rule. From the 12th to 14th century, we see that large quantities of translation into Latin of Arabic texts on science, medicine, and philosophy, as well as translation of the Quran and refutations of its texts, yeah, emerging in the 12th to 14th century. And in the 14th century, the Council of Vienna, the universities of Rome, Bologna, Paris, Oxford, and Salamanca were ordered to teach Oriental languages, including Arabic, though this had little practical effect initially. Yeah. So these are just some significant scholars and scholarships throughout the early period of Western scholarship. We have in the 8th century, for example, John of Damascus, yeah, a Syrian monk, who wrote Heresy of the Ismailites, one of the first polemical writings against Islam. So there was, in fact, polemical writings also against Islam, not only, I mean, from a Christian scholar, because as perhaps we know, there are also Muslim scholars who engage in such writings, polemical writings, refuting perhaps Christianity and also Judaism and other religions. Similarly, Christian scholars also dedicated some of their efforts to refute or to write against Islam in defense of their own faith. In the 9th century, we have Al-Kindi's Risala, which is the first complete refutation of the Quran, which was supposedly written by a Jacobite or Nestorian Christian. Yeah. So in this Risala, it basically refutes the Quran. Yeah. Argues perhaps that the Quran is not authentic, or that the Quran is basically rehashing the previous scriptures, and that's why it has, yeah, similar accounts, similar biblical accounts. For example, in the 12th century, we have Robert of Keaton, an Englishman who produced the first known Latin translation of the Quran. So Latin translation of the Quran emerged in the 12th century. In the 14th century, we have Raymond Lull. Yeah? I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, who wrote voluminous Arabic writings devoted to converting Muslims to Christianity. So he wrote in Arabic, yeah, with the aim to convert Muslims to Christianity. And he is also known as the founder of Western Orientalism. And then we have Ricoldo da Montecroce. Again, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, who is a Dominican priest who wrote an influential Christian denunciation of the Quran. I have to be honest here that I'm not familiar with Orientalist works, either on Islam or in the Quran in particular, because perhaps this was not my areas of expertise or specialization, unfortunately. Yeah. So basically, I'm just relating to you what have been written by others when it comes to these significant scholars and also scholarship. We mentioned just now that Muslim Spain or Andalusia, um, most or perhaps uh, uh, during most of the time of the Muslim rule of Andalusia, there was peaceful coexistence, yeah, between Islam, Christianity, and also Judaism, which lasted for nearly 8 centuries, because we mentioned from the 8th to the 15th centuries. So for a significant part of this period, the inhabitants of Spain on the whole coexisted peacefully. Yeah, the Muslims, the Christians, the Jews had no problems of coexisting and living together. And knowledge of Arabic language and literature was widespread even among the Christians and also Jews. And religious debates, dialogues were something which were common, and which even the rulers at that time encouraged, yeah, such engagements. And strong focus on scholarship was reflected in the existence of over 70 libraries and hundreds of thousands of books in the Andalusian capital of Cordoba. Yeah, so this actually reflected, yeah, the scholarly environment at that time, which perhaps also contributed to this peaceful coexistence of the various religions or Abrahamic faiths, who were able to live together. And they often, as mentioned just now, engage in dialogues, yeah, in debates, yeah, and that was something common and normal, and that did not actually prevent them, yeah, from peacefully coexisting. As for early polemic translations and knowledge of Islam, yeah, around the period of Cordoba's decline, Europeans from outside Spain began to come into increasing contact with Islam and Muslim culture. Yeah, and after the capture of Toledo in the 11th century, yeah, in 1085 by Christian forces, The Catholic Archbishop Don Raimundo and the Benedictine Abbot of Cluny, Peter the Venerable, began to commission scholars to work on the translation of various Arabic texts into Latin. Yeah, so if previously Muslim scholars or would translate, yeah, many works in Greek, for example, into Arabic now, since Arabic was perhaps can be considered the lingua franca at that time, and is considered perhaps the language of scholars, yeah, at that time. Then uh, they commissioned the translation of many Arabic works into Latin, yeah, be it scientific or philosophical texts of Andalusia. So religious works such as earlier refutations of the Quran and the Quran itself also emerged or translated into Latin, yeah, and it was largely polemical, and it was actually produced in an environment where Christians and Muslims competed to show the superiority of their respective faiths, as well as the alleged lack of authenticity of their counterparts. Yeah, so it was, the Christians and the Muslims, they competed with each other. Yeah, each wanted to outdo the other. Yeah, to show the superiority of their religion. Yeah, and also to argue, perhaps, that the other religion perhaps is not less authentic, etc., etc. And as such, such works are described as polemical. So Christian scholars hope to refute Islam through translations which aim to show that the Quran was a fabricated document concocted by Muhammad SAW and based on what he knew of Christianity and Judaism. So this was basically the main aim or objective of embarking on translations, yeah, in which they wanted to show that the Quran was fabricated, or that it was Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam who made the Quran up, yeah, and on the basis of what he knew about Christianity and Judaism. Yeah, again, this argument because in the Quran also there are stories about prophets, about nations, yeah, which are also present, yeah, in previous scriptures, yeah, rather than assuming, or rather than considering, yeah, the Quran to be a continuity of such scriptures. They said that in fact it is a fabrication and made up by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And also the Crusades had an impact, yeah, on Christian Muslim relations, and this also continued to fuel Europe's view of Islam as a great adversary of Christianity. Yeah, so during the Crusades, there was a heightened tension between Muslims and also Christians, and this perhaps started to shape the way in which Christians viewed Muslims. Yeah, and this was also, I mean, the crusade was sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Church, and as such, anti-Islamic sentiment continued to grow, and a flood of new anti-Islamic writings began to be produced as a result of that. And this actually represented the greatest obstacle to any genuine understanding or appreciation of Islam, Muslims, or the Quran at a popular level by European Christians. Yeah, so this basically affected the way in which European Christians viewed Islam. Yeah, so they viewed Islam in a very negative light due to this anti-Islamic writings, which were basically a result of this crusade and tension between Christians and Muslims. As for later Western scholarship, yeah, from the 15th to the 20th century, um, we see that the Muslim Ottoman Empire was a dominant force, yeah, was a dominant power, yeah, and that the Ottoman Turkish state that spanned three continents, including Europe, spurred the study in Europe of Islam and Muslim societies for military, political, economic, and also missionary purposes, yeah, due to the influence of the Ottoman Empire and the fact that the Ottoman Empire covered, yeah, a few continents, including Europe. Um, the Europeans were intrigued, yeah, and as such they also embarked on study of Islam, yeah, and Muslim societies, and this was done for military, political, economic, and also missionary purposes. Yeah. Um, In the 16th century, Arabic printing presses were installed in Venice and Rome, and Oriental studies established at University of Leiden in 1575. Um, and there was also an increase in the number of Western scholars with a knowledge of Arabic. Because Western scholars also started to study the Arabic language, or one of the Oriental languages, and as such, they had a very good command of the language, and as a result of that, they had access, to the sources which were in Arabic. In the 7th century, Pope Alexander the Seventh forbade production of the Quran in Latin. And in the 18th to 19th century, it, it can be described as the later Orientalist period, where Western scholars began to specialize in the study of Oriental languages, religion, and also culture. So in the 16th century, um, basically it was the start, of this study, but it was in the 18th and 19th century that specialization, began on Oriental languages, religion, and culture, which includes Arabic, Islam, and also Muslim societies. So here are some of the significant scholars and also scholarship when it comes to the later Western scholarship of Islam and also the Quran. We have John of Segovia, a Spanish Catholic theologian who produced a Castilian translation of the Quran, together with Muslim jurists, either the Jabir, I'm not sure again how to pronounce his name, but this was a joint effort, to basically produce a translation of the Quran. And then we also have Nicholas of Cusa, a German cardinal, who wrote Shifting the Quran, who argued the Quran was a beneficial introduction to the gospel. Remember, we mentioned 15th century, in which Muslims and Christians coexist peacefully, in Muslim Spain, and even though towards the end, um, and as such, as a result perhaps of this coexistence, uh, such works were actually produced, which presented the Quran, in the Castilian language, and also this argument by a German cardinal who said that the Quran was indeed a beneficial introduction to the gospel. In the 16th century, remember we mentioned about the installation of Arabic press, Arabic printing press in Venice, So a complete Arabic Quran was printed in Italy around 1538, around this time, in the 16th century. In the 17th century, we have William Bedwell, an English priest and scholar who produced a catalogue of standard Muslim naming and numbering of Quranic chapters, And then we have Joseph Justus Scaliger, a leading Arabist, who argued that the Quran should be read to understand language and history. And Abraham Wheelock, an English minister and professor of Arabic, who produced a translation and refutation of the Quran. So Bedwell's book basically provided uh, information, regarding standard naming and numbering of Quranic chapters, which was useful perhaps for researchers who were studying the Quran. And then we have the Arabists here, Scaliger, who argued that the Quran should be read to understand language and history, meaning that the Quran should be a source or a resource, for the study of language and also history. Because we all know that when it comes to the Quran, its unique literary style and also its miraculousness, it actually lies in its literary style, and that is considered to be the inimitability of the Quran, its unique, expressions of the Arabic language. As for the early Ottoman period, in which Muslim Ottoman Empire's presence in Europe spurred Europe to greatly increase its knowledge about Islam and Muslim societies. We did mention this fact, in some of the previous slides. and this was done actually for military, political, and also economic reasons, and also we mentioned for missionary purposes, yeah, and to a large extent also designed to further the Christian missionary effort. In the 16th century, beginning of European colonization of parts of the Muslim world, this motivated the West to continue the study of Islam and the Quran. Yeah, uh, due to colonization, due to perhaps their need to understand, yeah, the religion and also culture and also language of those who the West colonized. Yeah, and there were more extensive programs for the study of Islam and Arabic in universities as such. So the modern Orientalist periods, perhaps if we can label it as such, yeah, from the 18th century, which saw continued colonization of the Muslim world and the beginning of the Enlightenment, yeah, in the West, whereby Western thinkers began to question publicly the very foundations of religion, particularly Christianity and the Church. Yeah, so in the West. During this period they started to question, yeah, about the role of the church, and also about their own religion, Christianity, and they're subjected, uh, I mean, in doing so perhaps they also subjected Islam uh, to such scrutiny as well. So efforts were being made to further European understanding of Islam and the Quran. New teaching institutions began to appear in Paris and Vienna, which provided courses in both language and also Islamic culture. In the 19th century, bilingual editions of the Quran became more common, and European universities began to expand their programs of Arabic and Islamic studies to include also analysis of the Quran. So, a study of Islam now moved from being a subset of Oriental studies to an independent full field, of academic knowledge. So, initially, although Arabic and Islam was basically considered as one of the branches, yeah, one of the subsets of Oriental studies. Now it began to emerge as a discipline, independent discipline on its own. Yeah, and as a result, there was an increase in the study of Arabic, which led to numerous publications on Islamic religious, political, and also cultural history, and a growing number of translations and analysis of its religious and historical context. These are some of the significant scholars and scholarship. Yeah. Um, During the modern Orientalist period, we have George Sale. I don't know Sale or Sale again. I'm sorry, I do not know how to pronounce his name. Who produced the first published English translation of the Quran, made directly from Arabic. Yeah, not from Arabic to Latin and then Latin to English, but directly from Arabic. And in the 19th century, we have Gustav Rubel, who translated the Quran and introduced a Western numbering system for Quranic verses. So, in light of that, yeah, now let's look at the Quran in academia, basically in the Western academic setting. So by the 20th century, the study of Islam and Muslim societies has emerged as a significant area of Western scholarship. Yeah, remember we mentioned that now in the starting from the 19th century, yeah, the study of Islam and also the Quran became an independent field. So by the 20th century, the study of Islam and Muslim societies had emerged as a significant area of Western scholarship. Yeah, and that in the 20th and 21st centuries, we have seen breaking down of the traditional divide between the Western and Muslim worlds. Yeah, so now we see that this barrier, yeah, or this a distinction between Western and Muslim worlds has begun to be blurred. Yeah, whereby an increasing number of scholars collaborate across different faiths and countries of origin, and also there is this combining of traditional Islamic and Western approaches in the study of Islam and also the Quran. And since the World War II, in particular, Islamic studies at universities throughout the Western world has been developed and extended to include a large number of programs related to Islamic languages, history, and social sciences. So many scholars explored general areas related to the Quran without questioning Muslim accounts of its origin. So it was not so much polemical in nature, in which the scholars questioned the authenticity and origins of the Quran. Yeah, it was not about that anymore, but it was about understanding and also analyzing the Quran rather. Yeah. So others have questioned the traditional Muslim understandings of the origins of the Quran by applying similar methods to those used in studies of the Bible. So having said that, or nonetheless, there were also some, who questioned the traditional Muslim understandings of the origins of the Quran, because we all believe, we as Muslims believe, the Quran is basically the miraculous words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which was revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam conveyed to us, yeah, is indeed the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. However, there were some scholars who, questioned our understanding of the Quran. And we have to bear this in mind, that any study of the Quran must always be examined as a product of each scholar's own cultural history. So this is another approach. So the first approach we mentioned just now, there was no question about the authenticity. The second approach now questions a Muslim understanding about the Quran's origins and also authenticity. Then we have another approach in which it argues that any study of the Quran must be examined as a product of each scholar's own cultural history, yeah, which reflect the cultural understandings, subjectivities, and prejudices of the scholars. So here, hermeneutics basically plays a very important role. Yeah? The role of the leader, or the role of the one who studies, yeah, who studies the subject, is very important. And we have to discern how a scholar's subjectivities or prejudices may have affected their work, yeah, and remain aware of our own understandings and subjectivities as well, and the influence that they may be having on our views of such scholarship, yeah. So it's a two-way thing, that we also have to be aware of our own prejudices, yeah, and our own understandings, which would influence the way in which we view the works of Western scholars as such. So these are just some of the Western scholars. Yeah, we have, for example, Theodore. Again, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, who describes the Quran as a book composed of unstable words and letters and full of variants, which as a result could not be possibly divine. So this is what he argues. Yeah. And he was one of the foremost scholars to work on rearranging the Quran into a more chronological order. Instead of the order in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam arranged the Quran, he attempted to arrange the Quran in chronological order, based on what you call it, on when the verses or the chapters were revealed. Having said that, he accepted the structural coherence of major units of text, yeah, but he examined phraseology, manner, and style of passages within a given chapter in order to determine their likely sequence. And he relied too heavily on style in deciding the order of chapters, and that his assumption that Muhammad's initial emotion and also enthusiasm gradually waned was too simplistic. So basically, he made some of these arguments. We have John Wansbrough, one of the foremost proponents of the revisionist approach to the Quran, in which he examined the evidence for the acceptance and canonization of the Quran. And he argued that, the compilation of the Quran was not completed until around 150 years after the Prophet's death. And also the traditional accounts of the Quran's compilation were a salvation history or myth that was projected backwards by Muslims of the Umayyad period. So he argued, yeah, that the compilation, yeah, of the Quran was basically, the accounts about the compilation of the Quran were a salvation history or myth, yeah. And the Islam was more likely to have been a sect which grew out of debates within the Judeo-Christian tradition. So he said that, Islam was basically a byproduct of the debates, yeah, within the Judeo-Christian tradition, and naturally, as such, Muslims were generally critical of Wansbrough's approach, given its lack of recognition of core Islamic beliefs about the Quran. But the fact is that he was also criticized by a number of Western scholars, who noted that the gap between the time of the Prophet and the earliest evidence of the Quranic text is much shorter than he suggests. It's not 150 years old. Yeah, in fact, the Quran was compiled during the period of Uthman radiallahu anhu, and even during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there were records of the Quran, and in the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, there was a compilation or standardization of the Quran, in which the records of the Quran were basically compiled together. And we know this, right? We have actually gone through this. And then we have Patricia Crone and Michael Cook, yeah, who refer to Islam as Hajarism, yeah, referring to Hajar, yeah, based on Muhammad's claim to be descendant of the Prophet Ibrahim's slave boy Hajar, yeah, and that Islam was originally a form of Judaism practiced by the Hajarins, yeah, and they suggest that the Quran first began to be compiled under the governor of Al-Hajjaj of Iraq, and as such they came under immediate attack, yeah, from Muslim and non-Muslims scholars alike due to its heavy reliance on hostile resources, yeah, where they use or abuse Greek and Syriac sources, and it was bitterly anti-Islamic in tone, not only anti-Islamic in tone but also anti-Arabian in a sense, yeah. So when such works emerge in the West, it's not only Muslims who have issues with it, even some Western scholars who also have issues with what Patricia Crone and Michael Cook proposes. And then we have Andrew Lipin, for example, who is known for questioning traditional accounts of Islamic history, and his view that the Quran must be understood within a broader monotheistic rather than purely Arabian environment, and then it should be situated within its literary tradition and at the focal point of a reader-response study. Yeah, he has been accused of arbitrarily ditching history in favor of literary analysis. And in general, Lipin's work on early tafsir scholarship has been well received and is recognized as providing a valuable contribution to Quranic scholarship. Yeah, having said that. And then we have Christoph Lusenberg, which is basically a pseudonym of a German scholar, yeah, who also disputes the Orthodox Muslim account of the Quran, who argues that the Quran is based on Christian liturgical document written in a language closer to Aramaic than Arabic, yeah, on the basis of his knowledge of early Semitic languages and his study of the earliest available copies of the Quran. And he also suggests that understandings of the Quran today are based on an incorrect understanding of its origin, context, and function. And he proposes the recomposition of the Quran, which would allow Luxemburg's proposed recomposition of the Quran allows too much scope for superimposing his own preconceptions of what may be found in the text. Yeah, so this is problematic. Yeah, in a sense, if we accept this recomposition, because then we would give him the liberty to impose his own preconceptions of what may be found in the Quran. And then we have Gerd Puin, who suggests that parts of the Quran may even be 100 years older than Islam itself, and that the Quran is most probably a kind of cocktail of texts that were not all understood even at the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this was based on his study of 15,000 ancient sheets of paper discovered in Yemen in 1972 and said to contain sections of the oldest known extant records of Quranic verses. Yeah. Which basically show unconventional verse orderings and also textual revelations. And he believes that a fifth of the Quranic text is incomprehensible, and that by proving that the Quran has a history, he claims that he will enable Muslims to engage in a discussion of the Quran, which does not assume it is just God's unaltered word. So basically, again, he is questioning Muslims' account of the Quran and argues that even prior to the Quran, even prior to Islam, there were references to such, and in fact, the Quran predates Islam. So this is his argument. And then we have Richard Bell and also William Montgomery Watt, who actually had a very significant impact on Western understanding of the Quran. So Bell basically recognized that the Quran is a complex text worthy of serious study and commented that few books exercise a wider or deeper influence upon the spirit of man. So here there is this acknowledgement or recognition of the Quran. And also, Richard Bell suggested that the present form of the Quran rests upon written documents that go back to Muhammad's lifetime, and that modern study of the Quran had not raised any serious question of its authenticity. So the issue of authenticity here is not being raised anymore. The question the Islamic belief that the Quran is, however, having said that, he questions, the Islamic belief that the Quran is the direct word of God, yeah, because he argued that Muhammad played a significant role in its composition and that in writing the Quran, and that revelation underwent considerable revisions during the Prophet's lifetime and emerged as a finalized written scripture during what Bell referred to as the book period, namely the last 8 years of Muhammad's time in Medina. Watt, on the other hand, yeah, Montgomery Watt believed that the Quran came from God and that it is divinely inspired, yeah, and that the Quran was the word of God for a particular time and place, and that, like the Bible, the commands given in the Quran were valid for the society to which it was primarily addressed. Now let's move on to Muslim scholars in Western settings. So, because we have Muslim scholars who are working in institutions in the West, yeah, and as such, they have this access not only to the Islamic heritage but also to the approaches, to the methods, yeah, which were employed by Western scholars in their study of not only Islam but also perhaps other religions, and not only Arabic but also other Eastern languages, yeah. So an increasing number of Muslim scholars are taking up positions at Western universities, and as such, new approaches to the Quran, which combine traditional Islamic methodologies with modern theories, emerged. So we have Fazlur Rahman, who focused much of his work on considering the importance of context, yeah, to Quranic interpretation. So Fazlur Rahman, as we have seen when we looked at contextualization, the textualist and contextualist approach, yeah, to the Quran. Fazlur Rahman is a name which we came across, yeah, and he argues, yeah, for the importance or the significance of context in understanding the Quran. And then we have Amina Wadud, who can be considered a feminist scholar of the Quran, and we have Arukun, who combined his knowledge from a range of disciplines in the study of Quranic hermeneutics. And we have another example of Khalid Abul Fadl in the photo. Basically, he is quite old now. I'm not sure when was this photo taken. But you can also refer to his writings, yeah, who and he exhibits this uh, critical, very very critical approach, yeah, when dealing with the literalist readings of the Quran, yeah, and he argues that we should shift beyond this literalist approach in engaging or in dealing, interacting with the Quran. And then also we have, yeah, this encyclopedia of the Quran, which draws on extensive scholarly work by both Muslim and non-Muslim scholars in the areas such as linguistic, rhetorical, and narrative analysis of the Quran. Remember, we mentioned that the divide between Western scholars and Muslim scholars started to I won't perhaps we can use the word diminish, or started to fade, yeah, in which uh, Muslims and also Western scholars can come together and work, yeah, on analysis of the Quran, yeah. And this encyclopedia provides extensive data on terms, concepts, yeah, places, and history, and exegesis on subjects within the scope of Quranic studies. And it represents the first comprehensive multi-volume reference works on the Quran to appear in a Western language. And Jane Damon, again, I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, yeah, the Encyclopedia's general editor, focused on the Quran and its interpretation, as well as early Islamic history and relations between Islam and Christianity. So this is a product of Western academia, the Encyclopedia of the Quran in the English language. And if you want to read further, you may refer to Abdullah Sa'id's The Quran in Introduction, which provides, yeah, us with this overview of Western scholarship, yeah, when it comes to the Quran, or when it comes to Quranic studies. So the whole idea of this presentation is basically to provide an overview of how the West perhaps viewed the Quran, or efforts to study the Quran in the West. Yeah. So basically, that's a general idea, and to provide you with some information and also exposure to some of the thoughts and also ideas which were uh, presented or proposed, yeah, by Western scholars when it came to the Quran in particular and also Islam in general. So I will stop here. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Again, please stay safe and also stay sane. Yeah, take care of yourselves till we meet on Wednesday morning, inshallah. Thank you.